So we will be talking about life cycle in React. So you can go ahead and, as usual, remove this entire thing, or you can put it in another file for future reference. This is all practice, and I wish you do that because for you it will be future reference. Right now I'm out of the directory, so let me go into the practice app directory. Now I'm in the practice app directly. Let me start my local host. That's my server development, local server development. Now once that has been done, let's just make this smaller. Okay, I haven't saved it, so it's still showing me the previous. Once we save it, it's an empty browser. Okay, so let's create a small application. So it'll be called as the clock app. So we'll be creating a clock app to understand how lifecycle works and how lifecycle works in React. So let's create an ES6 class with a name clock that extends react.component. So what you can do for practice is you can create it as a function and then later convert it to a class. So that will be a good practice for you. And we'll say class clock extends react dot I don't know why that is happening. Okay, anyways, component we forgot to import React, and that's why that is happening. So import React from React, and we'll also be importing React on right here. Okay, so once this is done, we can open the brackets right here, and let's create a constructor called, and we'll give an argument called props, and we'll give it a super props as well. Alright, so we'll come out of this for now, and let's then later create the state. So before that, let's render and return. Add a single empty method to it called render. Move the body of the function into the render method. So that's when you create a function component. That's how you do it. Now let's return this value, and in this let's create a div and then a h1 where it says hello world, and it should give me a clock. It should give me my time. So it should give you the local time. So it is, this will be coming from a state. So let's go create that, and it will be put in the brackets. So this dot state is equal to date new date. So that's the object which we created, and date is having the value new date, which is a built-in function which will give us the current time when we access it. Now let's, so that gives, it accesses date and time, so we can have time right now, and that is how you do it. So this dot state dot date dot to locale local time. It is all camel case, so please be careful with these right here. It has to be capital, T has to be capital, L has to be capital. So to local time string. This should be giving us a date. Let's render it. Sorry, this should be giving us the time. React DOM dot render. let's call the component clock and document dot get element by id. Some small mistake right here. And let's just fix this first, and that's, you can see that the text editor will not light it up if you made a mistake, if you're not getting the same value from here. So this has to be in capital. I'm sorry about that. And from here, get element by id root. So also the render function should be inside of class. I don't know why the bracket has come here. Should be render function has to be inside, and there we go, lightened up. So let's save this. You should see the time right here, and it's not sticking. It gives you the current time, but it does not tick. I want it to be alive. I want it to tick. It should be 1224, 1225, 1226. I needed to change. So that's where life cycle comes. So how do we do that? Next, we'll make the clock set up its own timer and update itself every second. So here comes life cycle. Let us add life cycle methods to a class. But just before we do this, let me explain what life cycle is. So let's go and see what life cycle is. Okay, so let's discuss what adding life cycle methods to a class means. In application with many components, it's very important to free up resources taken by the components when they're destroyed. So that a life cycle, what it does is when a component comes up, there are a lot of components. Now we need to free up resources to make it fast and efficient. So we need to keep destroying components and bringing the new components up. Now we want to set up a timer. What do we want to do with our clock app? We want to set up a timer where the clock is rendered to the DOM for the first time. This is called mounting in React. Now when we set up a timer, clock is rendered to the DOM for the first time. So now this is called mounting. Also, we also want to clear the timer whenever the DOM produced by the clock is removed. Now when this is removed, the DOM has to remove it, the timer. We need to clear the timer. So this is called unmounting. There are two things in a life cycle in React, that is mounting and unmounting. These are very important concepts. Now we will be using this in the first project that we are doing. So in that we will be seeing how life cycle works. We'll see how state works. We'll also be using function components and class components, and we'll see where we'll have to use the function components, where we have to use the class components. So all these things we can learn in that. Now let's go ahead and we can declare special methods on the component class to run some code when a component mounts and unmounts in our code. Let's go ahead and do that. So when a component mounts and unmounts, we can declare special methods in our component class. So we'll go ahead and declare these special methods inside our class, but this will be right outside of constructor and before a render. So here we will be declaring component did mount. Alright, and the next one is component, guess what it can be. So it will obviously be component will unmount. You're right. So component will unmount. We'll have to type this out. So will unmount. Okay, it's right here. And let's close these two brackets. And so these methods are called the life cycle methods. These methods itself are called as its life cycle. So that is the life cycle of React. Now this component did mount function, this component did mount method runs after the component output has been rendered to the DOM. So once it has been rendered to the DOM, the class component, only then this function runs. After it has been rendered, after this has been rendered, this function runs. Now output has been rendered to the DOM. This is a good place to set up our timer. This will be the perfect place to set up our timer, because right after this we can set up our timer and the timer will start running right after we render it. So I will explain what this dot timer right after I finish writing this. Now I'm going to give a variable name this dot timer ID, and I'll tell you why I'm calling it this dot timer ID, why this variable is this dot timer ID. I'm going to set an interval and arrow functions. So this dot tick 1000. Alright, so this will give us a timer and it will tick, and we'll have to create a tick function later so that it ticks every second. And so what do you see how we save timer ID on this, that it's this dot timer ID? Now, well, so in this dot props is set by React itself. As I told earlier, this dot props, that is the props, is set by React itself, and this dot state has a special meaning. Now you are free to add additional, all these come in the data flow of React, but you are free to add additional fields to the class manually if you need to store something that doesn't participate in the data flow. Now this is not exactly participate in the data flow, but these are participating in the data flow. But if we want to store some value, we can always create our own manually. We can create it, our additional fields. Now let us tear down the timer. So once this has been put up, we'll have to, when this is mounting it up, now to unmount is basically destroying it. So let us tear down timer in the component will unmount lifecycle method. So component will unmount. Now let's tear it down here, so that will be clear interval. Here we set the interval. Here we are clearing the interval f of this. It takes the value this dot and the argument. Now once this has been done, timer I can put it as capitals as well. Now finally we will implement a method called a tick that the clock component will run every second. So we will have to put the tick function. Let's tick method right here, and let's give it as this dot set state, since we were changing state, which we cannot do right here. We'll have to change it here. Let's take date again, new date. So every second it's ticking, and every second the state is being changed. So I hope you understand. So now this is stagnant, that is, this is static, that is 12 and 24 seconds. Now here 12 hours 24 seconds, so that is static, but we need to keep changing. So for that, every second we need to keep setting a new state. It keeps rendering, and I'll show it to you in the console right away. So let's go ahead and save this. Now the clock will be ticking every second. You see this? So it's 12:09:59, and now it became 12:10 seconds. Now the seconds are ticking. Now let's go ahead and check it out in our developer console. So in our developer tools, right here in more tools, developer tools, you can go ahead to elements, and in your root div, you can see that the h2 tag, you can see that each time only this keeps rendering over and over again. It mounts, unmounts, mounts, unmounts, mounts, unmounts. So that happens every second because that's how we have set it up. And that's about life cycle. Now we will create another a component. This is a little distracting because this keeps changing right here. Okay, so let's create another function component, a method component, and let's call it as app. Now the reason of doing this, we'll create a nested component and see how that each of them are unique. Now each component of these are unique. Let's see how that is. So let's return some value. Okay, so here let's open up a div and use the clock component. Now, as I said earlier, we are nesting it. So we're taking this component right here and putting it inside this. We've done this earlier. Nested components is one of the examples in different types of components. Now let's put 3 of them right here. And we'll render app and not clock, which contains clock component inside of app, that is nested component. Let's save this. It says hello world thrice, and it's showing us thrice. So now let's go ahead and open our developer tools. You can also press on F12. So that's developer tools, and you can go ahead to root and see here that each of these are different. All of them are different. There are different components, so components are unique by itself. So all of them are mounting and unmounting, mounting and unmounting. They're all different, and I just wanted to show you that in the lifecycle module. This is actually a very interesting topic, and we'll be going in depth. And this is actually quite interesting, and a lot of questions are asked in interviews. So you can go ahead, do a little bit more research and learn more about lifecycle alone. Now, as I mentioned before, we will be going in depth about lifecycle. So let's go back to our code editor. I'm just going to make this big. Now let's quickly recap what's going on and the order in which the methods are called. Now when the clock component, so let's just remove the function app for now. That was just to show the difference, and let's call the clock component itself and save this. We should be seeing only one now. Okay, that's good. Okay, so when the clock component is passed to the React DOM.render. Now I'm going to explain it very slowly and very quickly because it'll be easy for you to understand. Once you know this basic, then you can crack anything. Anything can be done after this. So once the clock component is passed to React DOM.render, what React does? React calls the constructor of the clock component. Now, as I told earlier, that when the component is called, the constructor is called instantaneously. It's just like how we did in ES6. If you remember earlier, we created a class and then we created an instance of that class. And as soon as we as soon as the class is created, an instance of that class is called. And once the instance is created, the instance calls the constructor. Similarly, here, once the component is rendered, it calls the constructor function. Now, since clock needs to display the current time, it initializes this dot state. Now, what is clock component supposed to do? It is supposed to initialize the this dot state with an object including the current time. We will later update this state. We'll do this, and then obviously we'll update this later here. That's what we did. So React then calls the clock component's render method. Now after this, React then calls the clock component's render method. Where is the render method? This is the render method right here. So once a constructor is called, this dot state is initialized, it goes right here to render. This is how it flows. Now this is how React learns what should be displayed on the screen. React then updates the DOM to match the clock's render output. So what it does is it updates the DOM, that is the document object model, to whatever we are rendering. Now once this is updated, when the clock output is inserted into the DOM, React calls the component didMountLifeCycle method. Now once this is updated to the browser right here, once it is updated to the DOM, now this is updated, it instantly calls the component didMount method. Now this component didMountLifeCycle method. Inside it, the clock component asks the browser to set up a timer it asks the browser to set up this timer to call the component's tick method once a second. So once this is done, it goes right here. Once this method is called, it goes right here to the tick method, so that once a second it calls the component's tick method every second. Now after this, every second the browser calls the tick method. Inside it, the clock component schedules a UI update by calling the set state. Now the UI is updated every second, so that is what the set state did, with an object containing the current time. This is the object containing the current time. Now thanks to the set state call, React knows the state has changed. The calls the render method again to learn what should be done on the screen. This time this .state.date in the render method will be different. So the render output will include the updated time. This will be different. Now this is done. This part is done. It goes and checks with the render again. This is updated, so it renders again. That's why you see that blink which keeps coming. And so the render output will include the updated time. React updates the DOM accordingly. Now if the clock component is ever removed from the DOM, now we go to another page or something, this component will get removed from the DOM. React calls the in the end, React will call the component will unmount lifecycle method, so the timer is then stopped. This is how it flows. What we created, this timer ID, is a manually created, which does not interfere with the data flow. This is how everything occurs. First, this render is called, the clock component is called, and then it goes to constructor, then it goes right to the render, then it goes to the component did mount, then it goes to tick, then it goes to render again. And this is all happening super fast. This is the V8 engine of JavaScript, which is happening really, really fast, and that's why we don't know about all of this. Now once this is done, if we go out of it, then this component will unmount, lifecycle method is called, and it will be destroyed. It will not be destroyed, but we will break it off. We will remove it. We will unmount, and that's about it.